All right, so our announcements for tonight. So one more time, I want to mention Mike's thank you gift is out on the admin table. If you guys haven't had a chance, you're running out of time. So make sure to write a note in there and tell him thank you and maybe encourage him with a favorite Bible verse that you have. Another point here is, as I said last time, we have one of our children's leaders. He's coordinating with his church to gather warm coats and blankets and sleeping bags. So if you guys have extra ones lying around that you're willing to give up, I know the homeless in our community would definitely appreciate that. And then last point, I just want to remind you, if you don't have a badge yet, please talk to your group leader about how you can get one of these badges. I hear so many great stories about the different badges, and as you look around, you see people with ones that were from 10 years ago or 20 years ago even, and I feel like all these badges tell a story. I've actually still got my Orlando one, but we all kind of keep our badge with us, and it kind of tells a little bit about who we are. So with that being said, let's start in prayer. Lord God, thank you for this passage, Lord. Thank you for your awesome glory. We can't even really find the proper words to describe it, but we know it when we see it, Lord, and we know that you are the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and your awesome glory sets you apart as holy. So, Lord, we want to know you, even though you are incomprehensible in so many ways, Lord, but we want to know who you are because we want to know who made us, and we want to be more like you, Lord. So I pray that you would just teach us today and instruct our hearts how we can grow to be more like you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, let's begin with our map. Okay, so last week you'll recall we ended at Caesarea Philippi, so we're going to start back there. And then what I believe, there's a lot of debate on exactly where the Transfiguration happened, but I go north to this Mount Hermon, which is all the way at the top of Israel. If you stand on that mountain, you can see Lebanon on the other side. And then we're going to finish today back in Capernaum one more time. We spent a lot of time in Capernaum this year. So with that, we will talk about the year 1911. So in 1911, a man named Walt Disney had just moved to Kansas City, Missouri. And he was one of 5 kids in a poor family. At a young age, his parents put him to work. So at the age of 14, he was actually working on a commuter train, and he sold snacks and candy and sodas to the passengers. Walt and his brother, Roy Disney, they would get up at 4:30 in the morning to deliver the daily newspaper, and then when they were done with school, they would deliver the evening paper as well. So because he was in this constant schedule of working hard, it took a toll on his schooling, and he would sometimes fall asleep in class. And it kind of turned into a problem when eventually he's getting failing grades in most of his subjects. So he decides to drop out of school at the age of 16, and he wanted to join the U.S. Army, but they wouldn't take him until he was the right age. So instead, he joined the Red Cross. He went all the way over to France and worked as an ambulance driver. After he kind of worked through that a little bit, he moved back, and his passion for drawing led him to pursue art, and he joined an art studio. But after a short time, Walt Disney was fired, and his boss said Walt lacked imagination and had no good ideas, which doesn't make any sense to me. So he's unemployed, and Disney, he tries to start his own company this time, but he wasn't able to find any clients, so he loses that business. He goes to his brother Roy, and he's persistent and tries to start an animation company this time. The company's called Laugh-O-Gram, and they made cartoons, but this too failed miserably. It seems like every turn, he's just continuing to fail. So he's got $40 in his pocket. He decides to go out to Hollywood and try his hand at acting. But this again was a total failure. Everything failed. Walt was at rock bottom. He was struggling to make ends meet. So he called his brother to come out to California. Let's make one more animated short. Maybe this time something will be different. They made a film called Trolley Time, and it had some success. But the company who made it, they actually stole his creation. And again, he's out of a job. His only prospect seems to be that he keeps failing. Every attempt, every direction, every idea, every effort was met with a brick wall. At a certain point, I think all of our confidences would be shaken if we had gone through the string of failures that he had been through. How do you keep trying when you failed 100 times in a row? But rather than give up, Walt, he breathed a deep sigh, and he picked up his pencil. He decided to reinvent this Oswald the rabbit that was stolen from him. He reinvented him as Mickey the Mouse. And, he got enough success to keep the lights on at his studio. He hired some other animators. And what he did next, people thought he had lost his mind. He started to make the first feature-length animated film. Before he knew it, he was $2 million in debt. And he just kept plugging away. He kept building, he kept making this animated film. And eventually, the film debuted 4 days before Christmas in 1937. People thought that he was gambling his entire future on this one film. But sure enough, when Snow White was released in theaters, it was a huge success and everyone loved it. When I read about historical figures like this, I always find there's a turning point. There's a point when everything was going wrong, and then there's a point where everything changed, and there's that one moment in the middle that was the tipping point of his entire career, and that's what this was. It was the release of Snow White in 1937. So when they had the Oscars in 1939, this is a picture of Shirley Temple. She's awarding Walt Disney with an honorary Oscar for Snow White. She gave him an Oscar, and then you can see there's 7 tiny dwarf Oscars that are next to that. This was the moment that he was basically in front of all of Hollywood elites. It was broadcast on national radio, listened to by every naysayer of his life. Disney was affirmed as a genius, and it was shouted from the mountaintops. All of a sudden, the name Disney became a household name. That first brilliant victory that he had set his sights on even bigger and better goals in his career, and it drove him to push the limits of his dreams. So that idea of affirmation, that was really what changed everything. Everyone was very critical of him, and then all of a sudden he was affirmed, and it changed the trajectory of his life. So that word affirmation, the dictionary says what that means is it's praise or support stated publicly as a fact. So we can see how words have power, don't they? Proverbs 18 tells us the same thing. It says, the tongue has the power of life and death. So when people were calling Disney a failure, he was jumping from disappointment to disappointment. But when people started calling him a success, his path straightened all of a sudden. People started to invest in who he was. And all it took was that first great affirmation to change the trajectory, and the rest was history. True affirmation can't be bought or sold. It has to come from the heart, because true affirmation only counts when its claim is undeniable and just self-evident in the world. So let's shift our focus to Jesus. What kind of a life has Jesus had to this point? Let's put this in perspective. The criticism of Jesus is mounting with every chapter. His miracles somehow cause more skepticism than belief. His teaching is raising doubts as far away as Jerusalem right now. And his opposition seems to be picking up more and more speed. He's even uniting his enemies together. The people who call themselves the people of God are the people who are opposing Jesus. And throughout it all, Jesus is living in poverty as he goes through this mission, and he's constantly running into the brick wall of our human heart. Could an affirmation for Jesus change everything? Could that be the tipping point in his life? If God the Father would just step in and announce to the world that who Jesus is, and he would just endorse his son, would that launch Jesus' ministry into a whole new level? What if the booming voice of God affirmed the Son's authority? Would it silence all of the people who criticize him? Could that be the breakthrough in Jesus' message that he needs? So we're going to look at 3 different kinds of affirmation that we see in our passage today. So first, obviously, the transfiguration is a very obvious example of affirmation. We see the radiance of Jesus' glory, and we see the Father's loving affirmation of his Son. Who can question what God has affirmed? And then the second section, we're going to see Christ's victory over demon possession and eventually over death. He affirms his ability to wield the power of God. What obstacle can possibly stand in his way when he can command faith like this? And then lastly, Jesus' short parable about the king and the children paying taxes, that affirms our place in the kingdom. So let's look at all these different examples of affirmation and see how it all comes together. So let's begin in verse 2. So as I said, we are heading north from Caesarea Philippi. Jesus and his disciples, they're going up a high mountain. Some scriptures call it the sacred mountain. And there's some debate about which mountain this is, but the highest mountain in all of Israel is Mount Hermon, and they're already in the vicinity when they started, from Caesarea Philippi. So when Peter, James, and John, they reach the top of this mountain, and something just shocking is in front of their eyes. They're stunned by what they see. And verse 2 kind of captures this. There he was transfigured before them, his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. So there are too many odd details there to even go through. But first off, let's just ask the question, what are these people all doing on a mountaintop? As a reader, we're just as stunned, I think, as the disciples were. And I think it's easy to forget as we kind of enter, because this chapter begins with a boom, that chapter 17 comes after chapter 16. I just want to remind you that fact. That's important. Because remember, Peter had just rebuked Jesus' prediction of his death. And then Jesus rebuked him back. He said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. And sure enough, Peter, James, and John are now following Jesus. They literally follow him. And when they get to the top of the mountain, the topic of discussion is the cross. Okay, and how do I know that? Because Luke chapter 9 adds that detail. It says, 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which was about to bring fulfillment at Jerusalem. So it would mean that this whole event serves as a kind of planning session for his impending death on the cross. So there's also another carryover from the end of last section. The very last verse of chapter 16, it says, let's see here. It says, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So many theologians count this mountaintop event with Jesus as prophecy of coming into his kingdom. We're seeing a glimpse of Jesus' royal presence as he actually steps into the kingdom. And he shines in holy glory as soon as he's on the other side. It's almost as if Jesus peeled back a heavenly curtain and he stepped inside, and heaven shined through that kingdom. It clothed him in his true glorious form. And then to add to the grandeur of this whole thing, we have 2 famous Bible heroes show up, Moses and Elijah. So why these 2 men? We could pick from a long list of biblical heroes. We could have invited Abraham or King David or the prophet Samuel. Maybe he could have invited Noah in there. But remember back to Matthew chapter 5. Jesus says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So that phrase, the law and the prophets, it's all over the Bible. It's a way of saying everything written from basically the book of Exodus to the book of Malachi. The entire New Testament is statements by the law and the prophets. And so we know that among all the prophets that God spoke to, Elijah was celebrated as the greatest of the prophets. He really represents that group of people. And then if you wanted the biggest spokesperson of the law, you might want the guy whose name is in the title, the Law of Moses. He's kind of an important guy. So Jesus is having a discussion with Mr. Law and Mr. Prophet. and that represents an affirmation by the full authority of God's word. And just to make it even one more step official, Deuteronomy 19 says, a matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So sure enough, this whole event is witnessed by the 2 most important men of the Old Testament. So we've got, 2 witnesses. Moses and Elijah fit every criteria, and it makes this moment officially stamped and approved. Take notice at how Moses and Elijah clearly answer to Jesus. It's not the other way around. Jesus is running this. How many Pharisees and Sadducees can claim that kind of authority? So as Jesus steps into his kingdom with Moses and Elijah, the next detail that really jumps off the page to us is that this scene is so bright. We see so much, description of the light that's coming out of this. So we're told that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. And then we jump over to Luke 9, the parallel passage. It says his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. The English language just doesn't even capture what did this really look like. We just, think of the brightest things in nature, and it's kind of like that. That's kind of the best that we can do in our language to say what this was. Things like color and brightness and radiance all reach another level in the kingdom of heaven. I found some other passages in the Bible that talk about the glory of God. Here's what 1 Timothy 6 says. It says, God, the blessed and only ruler, the King of kings and the Lord of lords, who alone is immortal and who lives in unapproachable light. Hebrews 1 says, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. And then another good one, Revelation 1, John says this, he turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet, with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace. So in all of these accounts, the glory of God is not so much seen as it's experienced. For a brief moment in time, a doorway into the kingdom of heaven opens up, and we just get to glimpse inside for a moment at how brilliant it is. So this glorious scene on top of Mount Hermon, it affirms Jesus in several different ways. So we all, celebrated Jesus as being a man of humility, but his ability to open the kingdom at any moment shows that he has full access and he has full command of this kingdom. And then the presence of Moses and Elijah, like I said, it gives us a scope of his authority. And then lastly, the radiating light that's flowing out of Jesus' body, it reveals his divine and supreme power. Colossians 2 says, for in Christ all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form. The creator of light, he's the one who said, let there be light, has a reservoir of light within him. And it's able to shine like the sun at will. This is not the man of humility that we're used to. This shows the divinity and the supremacy of Christ. It's a power that intense who's going to spark our curiosity about this thing we call glory. What is this glory? Let me ask you a question. What does glory look like in your life? Have you ever seen glory before? What would it look like if you did see glory? In this life, we're probably never going to see Jesus shining like lightning on a mountaintop. But we can probably all claim to have seen some kind of glory at some point. The dictionary defines glory as magnificence or great beauty. There are lots of common, everyday examples of glory. Some of these may sound familiar to you. Seeing a sunset might be a form of glory. Maybe standing at the foot of a great mountain, or maybe like the Grand Canyon or something. Receiving applause from your peers for a job well done. Maybe you've experienced that. Winning an award or getting a job promotion. So we count these things as glory because of the way they look or the way they make us feel. But as we read about God's glory in the Bible, it's almost in an entirely different magnitude of glory. In Isaiah 6, the seraphim call to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. "Woe to me," I cried. "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Does that sound like the kind of glory of like an applause at the end of a meeting or something? That's completely a different level. And Psalm 29 says, "The voice of the Lord is over the water. The glory of God thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord strikes with flashes of lightning. The voice of the Lord shakes the deserts, and it twists the oaks and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all cry, 'Glory.'" This is an entirely different magnitude than what we've ever experienced of glory. Our imaginations fail to even grasp what it would be like to stand in the glory of God. Even just in these examples, standing and just hearing his voice, it didn't have to be anything special. Just those simple tasks puts the onlooker, to the floor in a state of awe and panic. The majesty of God is that extraordinary. So we see there's this huge divide between our world glory and the glory of God. But here's an odd kind of detail. Despite God's awesome nature, what captivates God of all things is his creation. It's you and I. That's what captivates the most glorious figure in the universe. And Scripture tells us that we have been chosen by the King of glory for an important job that magnifies that glory that he has. 1 Peter 2 says, "We are a chosen people, a people for God's own possession, so that we may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into marvelous light." See, here's why we're chosen. It tells us in there. It says, "so that." It says, "we may proclaim the excellencies of God." Another way to say that is we are proclaiming the glory of God, and that's why he chose us. So I realize this kind of picture of his glory, that actually gives us the answer to the greatest question of all mankind. Maybe you've asked this question before. What is the purpose of life? And the answer that verse gives us is the purpose of life is to glorify God. Let me say it another way. Our purpose is to take his awesome glory that is almost hidden in the world around us and to proclaim it. And to that end, God has created us with a capacity to see glory everywhere we go. And we are to witness to it. We are actually born into this world with a God-sized appetite for glory. When we worship the glory of God, something within our soul is satisfied. Maybe you've been to a church service and they were all singing, and there was something about it that magnified God's glory, and it made you feel whole in that moment. We taste the thrill of God's glory when we recognize God's glorious presence that is in us and it is moving through us. And it isn't that shock and awe kind of glory we said before. It is a glory that lifts our spirit. God's glory can be experienced even at home, when we enter the throne room in prayer. When we open our Bibles and we spend time with him, we can experience his glory in that moment. And when we serve others as the hands and feet of Christ, we can experience the glory of God. So with that right perspective, that the glory is all around us, we suddenly realize that God's glory is everywhere. The angels cried out to Isaiah, remember, they said, "The whole earth is full of his glory." So on the mountaintops, the disciples in the first scene that we had here, they didn't need to leave earth. They didn't need to enter into some dream state to witness Jesus' glory. God's glory is wherever he is. So the good part is that we are born to know glory because God made us this way. But unfortunately, this also comes with a warning. It isn't all good, because in our fallen state, our appetite for glory can lead us astray. if we mix in pride with the search for glory, or mix in envy or greed, these things lead us away from God. All of a sudden, we end up with something that is ugly and broken rather than something that is beautiful and fulfilling. Only the glory of God satisfies us. When we open our discussion every week, I kind of love and hate at the same time that first question that we have in BSF. It says, how have you seen God's activity during the week? How has he provided, answered, comforted, restored, or guided? Perhaps we could rephrase that question a bit for next week. How have you seen God's glory? If you struggle to answer that question, let me encourage you. God's glory goes wherever he goes. Look carefully in every circumstance, in every hardship you face, and in every victory, and I believe you will catch a glimpse of God's glory. So then we get to verse 4. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down on the ground, terrified. So as if the endorsement from Moses and Elijah weren't enough, now God the Father's booming voice goes one step further. And if you're keeping count, you'll remember this is the second time he said that, because right after Jesus was baptized and came out of the water, God said the exact same phrase. So the Father's affirmation really has 2 parts to it, if we break this down. First of all, he's pleased with his son because he loves him. And second, Jesus' words should be listened to because he's pleased. From this affirmation, we can know that Jesus is aligned with the Father. This is kind of a public declaration that they are on the same page. Jesus said in the Gospel of John, Holy Father, protect them so they may be one as we are one. So, and yet, even though they are one, this passage shows us that the Son is not talking to himself. We know that they actually have distinct persons. So the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are 3 distinct persons of the Trinity, and yet God is one being. Every detail in this passage witnesses the Trinity and comes to the realization that Jesus is fully God. His power is the power of God. His teaching is the teaching of God. His actions and his miracles have the authority of God. His life is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, just as it was prophesied. And if Jesus is God, then his death on the cross has the final say about our sin. What greater payment for your salvation could possibly be made than God giving himself up for you? It wasn't a son that he despised that he sent to the cross. It was the son that he loved, and that was the son that was given to you. Here is where this passage leads us. God's love for you and I is affirmed in the most glorious way possible. So here's my first principle today. The authority of Jesus is affirmed by the glory of God. So in this mountaintop revelation, the kingdom of heaven was wide open, the representatives of the law and the prophets were there, the glow of Jesus' radiance illuminated the mountain, the booming voice of God spoke approval. I challenge you to imagine a greater spectacle of Jesus' affirmation than this moment that gets outlined in Matthew 17. The only thing that seems a little bit out of place as I read this is one detail: the audience. Verse 9 says, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. That seems a bit backwards from the way that we see affirmation in the world. Usually you're supposed to invite everyone to an affirmation. We're used to hearing, having as many people as possible to witness. Affirmation is really equity, isn't it? The greater the crowd, the greater the affirmation. And the greater the affirmation, the greater the honor. So why not invite the Pharisees and the Sadducees to this moment? I would love to see the look on their face as they witness this. Or what about invite Herod, to this. But Jesus' mind is that he wanted 3 of his disciples there, and that's it. What's revealed is this: Jesus was not motivated to do this event by pride, and he had nothing to prove to the Pharisees. This took place to fulfill his role as Messiah and to prepare for the greatest moment of glory that's yet to come, and that is the cross. He was focused on complete readiness for the cross so that we could dwell with him in the awesome presence of God. So let's jump over to the next section. So our ears are still kind of ringing from the voice of God and just the shaking of the mountain, and all of a sudden we're back to normal things like demon possession, right? So a father of a young boy is possessed by a demon, and he can't be healed by the disciples. You remember this? So when Jesus has no trouble healing the boy, the disciples have a question for him. Verse 19, the disciples came in private and asked him, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" He replied, "Because you have so little faith. Truly, I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." So you remember back in Matthew 10, he sent out all of his disciples on missionary trips throughout the region, and he gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. So now they're asking themselves, what gives? We had this ability before, and now we can't do it. They were just getting the hang of healing, and they were trying to figure out how come their faith is so small. And it's not just small, it's mustard seed small. And if mustard seed faith can move a mountain, how much smaller must their measly faith be? On some level, I think I'm a little bit encouraged by the fact that they couldn't heal one time, because there have been plenty of times I couldn't heal anyone. And then the disciples' failure, I think it becomes a little bit relatable that way. But if the disciples' faith was smaller than a mustard seed, how much smaller is our faith? How does our faith measure up? We read this passage with a measuring stick in one hand and an ambitious faith in the other hand, and we ask, what is our faith really capable of? Like, seriously, what can we really do with faith? So I find the apex of effective faith is Jesus, obviously. He doesn't even break a sweat, getting rid of this demon from a boy with a single word. And that's the same demon that it took an entire crew of disciples to fail to remove. We've seen numerous miracles of Jesus' powerful faith throughout Matthew. We saw him commanding the wind and the waves. We saw him walking on water, multiplying fish and loaves. We haven't seen Jesus struggle even for a second. It's so easy to accept that Jesus can do anything. His power over demons and storms and illnesses affirms that Jesus has ultimate faith. We never know exactly what is the ceiling of our faith. What can we do with this? But we are told what small faith can do. It can move mountains. I don't know about you, I've never moved a mountain, and I've actually never met anyone or heard of anyone in the last 2,000 years that can do this. So if you're like me, this pinches a little bit. Does this mean we all have small faith? Nobody has decent faith. Why would Jesus give such an impossible standard for faith? So on some level, I feel challenged to grow in my faith, but in another level, I also feel inadequate by that statement. I wonder if there's something more to what Jesus is saying here. So first things first, for the record, I do believe that God can actually move mountains, and the Bible tells me so. Zechariah 14:4 talks about Jesus' second coming. It says, "On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half of the mountain moving north and half of the mountain moving south." So there you go. In Scripture, God can move mountains. It actually will happen. But besides prophecy, there's also a historical context for this statement. About 4 decades before Jesus was born, Herod decided that he was going to build a palace on the exact spot where he had a major military victory. The problem was this: the palace was designed to be basically a mountain, and the location was way out in a flat desert. So rather than pick a new location, he's the wealthiest man in the world at this point, Herod decides to build an entire mountain on the spot that he chose. So Herod used his wealth and his influence, and he assembles a giant construction crew, and they literally moved a mountain's worth of dirt into that spot, and they built a mountain. This palace complex is known as the Herodian. It was a major engineering feat, and still to this day, I don't think we understand exactly where did they get all the dirt from. But let me restate Jesus' comment this way. If Herod could move a mountain with wealth and influence, can't the people of God move a mountain with faith? Is faith not much more powerful than wealth and influence? Do we believe that? I don't know about you, but when I think about it in these terms, the fact that Herod got how to move a mountain, and yet we are scratching our heads about how to move a mountain, it really speaks to me personally. The reason why we struggle with the idea of faith moving a mountain is because we're too focused on what we can individually do. We easily forget that we are the body of Christ, and together we can do things like this. We actually have done things like this. We've done greater things. The power of a community of faith is so much more. We can look at the result of the disciples' faith in the early church. As we study that part in Acts, greater things did happen. Empires fell, churches spread throughout the globe, the kingdom of heaven expanded. There is so much more. This list could go on. Jesus can be trusted to say what faith can and can't do because he's the Lord of faith. Verse 22 is maybe the greatest triumph of faith. He says, when they came together in Galilee, he said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life. There is no greater work of faith in the world than Jesus dying and resurrecting. By faith, even the impossible becomes possible. So that brings me to my second principle. Jesus' command of faith affirms his ability to do the impossible. He can command the waves, he can walk on water, he can multiply fish and loaves, he can summon Moses and Elijah from heaven, he can expel demons. Can we just admit that Jesus does the impossible and call it a day? We don't need a full list of what he can do. At this point, it's anything, it's everything. At a certain point of reading the Gospel of Matthew, I just get to this point in Matthew 17 and decide that Jesus is infinite. There's no point in putting any limit on his power. Jesus' ability to do anything at any time affirms that the impossible is within his reach. But the odd thing about his power, his great infinite power, is the disciples, they had no energy from what he said about being resurrected. Do you notice what they said? After he gave them that great prophecy, he said, and the disciples were filled with grief. Something to me doesn't line up. Jesus has a perfect record of beating the odds, and their response was grief. How could this be? The power of faith means very little to us until we have a proper response. We constantly have to reconcile Jesus' affirmed power with our half-heartedness. Why is there such a great divide between what Christ can do and what we believe he can do? What is it going to take for our faith to rise to our God? And then we have our final section. There's this temple tax, and the collectors for the temple tax, they approach Peter with a trap. They ask, doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax? Notice how it's a little bit passive-aggressive in their wording of this question, I think. So the tax that's mentioned here is in the Old Testament, and it was a godly tax, but it was actually levied on soldiers before they went to war. In Exodus 30, it says, you shall take the atonement money from the sons of Israel and give it for the service of the tent of meeting so that they may be a memorial for the sons of Israel before the Lord to make atonement. So Jesus knows that this tax actually has no relevance to him and to Peter, and this was at best an optional tax. But over the years in Israel, this became, it became highly optional in the sense that people were looked down on if they didn't pay it. So Peter, bless his heart, he shrugs off the questions and he says, why, of course. Yes, he does pay the temple tax. But he goes back to Jesus just to double check. And I love the next part of this verse. It says, when Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. Peter didn't even open his mouth. Jesus just said something right away. Verse 25, for whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others? From others, Peter answered. Then the children are exempt, Jesus said to him. But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch and open its mouth, and you will find a 4-drachma coin. So Jesus makes a very clever point here. He says the temple tax should ultimately go to the king of the temple, and the children of the king have a special privilege. Well, we can put ourselves in this parable. We are the children of the king. In a roundabout way, Jesus is affirming that we are children of God, and therefore we are exempt. It's an enormous claim. This whole thing is not even about taxes. It's about our special status as a child of God, and it entirely changes our citizenship in this world. If we are children of God, then we are citizens of heaven, and we are exempt from the worldly entanglements. So here's the last principle. Our Father affirms our exemption from worldliness. So the moment that we're adopted as heavenly, sons from the Father, some pretty big changes took place. Our relationship is radically different because our home and our family is radically different. Notice how the moment we're saved, we're not raptured into heaven. God actually places us in this world to live, to be in the world, but not to be of the world. In John 17, Jesus says, my prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. So it is the will of God that we would live in this place, and that we would be stewards, and we would be ministers for the gospel in this world. So this particular affirmation is not directed at Jesus, it's directed at us. We have a special privilege because we have a special Father, but we're not to use it to our advantage. So, just in summary today, what affirmation would elevate your faith today? If the booming voice of God could speak from a cloud right as you're walking to your car, what would you most need to hear from God? Those mountaintop words of God that we heard earlier today, they speak personally to us today. He says, you are my child, whom I love. With you I am well pleased. Listen to me. Those words speak to my heart today. Let's pray together. Lord God, thank you for making us your children. We can't even fathom the privileges and the benefits that go with being the child of God. But we know one thing for certain. We know that you are the God of faith, and so we are called to live by faith as your children. Lord, I pray that you would speak into our hearts today about the areas where we lack faith, and that you would just affirm us and strengthen us and encourage us to live by faith and not by sight. Lord, I pray that you would make us men who would glorify your name, and we would live according to your glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks, everyone.